Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug. I'll be the host for today's class. Welcome. Glad you are all here and you're joining us, and those of you online, thanks for joining us as well. I've been to hundreds, thousands of these classes, and never once have I walked out of here disappointed. So if you come here, stay here. Open yourself up to what's going to be given here today, and you won't leave, the right part of you won't leave disappointed. All right, so the layout of our classes this morning is Guy will give about a 60-minute talk. We'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for about a half hour or so of questions and answers where you online can talk directly to Guy if you're on GoToWebinar, or you can chat with Guy. Just go in the chat box, write a question in. Guy, we will try to get that answered this morning by Guy if at all possible. And the rest of it is if you're in the room and you have a cell phone, now's the time to turn it off if you haven't done so already. I think we're ready to get going. Let's get started. Here is the topic for today's talk. Insights into the immeasurable nature of your true self. Here's your key lesson, our key lesson. Just as a prism takes in sunlight to reveal its hidden array of many colors, so do impressions pass into and through our awareness, revealing their infinite number of unexpected characters and their qualities, all in the same moment. I'm going to read it once more. Just as a prism takes in sunlight to reveal its hidden array of many colors, so do impressions pass into and through our awareness, revealing their infinite number of unexpected characters and their qualities, all in the same moment.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Nice deep breath. You're going to need all the oxygen you can have and take in this morning. We're going to look at something quite beautiful, quite deep, incredibly vital to your development as a human being. So, how many of you can take in some of the gist of that key lesson? What is it alluding to? You know what a prism is. You've all seen one. It sits there, this crystalline form, and as light enters into it, it has no color itself that you can see with the eye. As that light enters the prism, it exits the prism in principally 7 major colors, but all the variations thereof. So prism takes in the light. When it comes out of that prism, that which you couldn't see was in the light, now you can see. People used to look at those things for hours in the 60s. Well, I want to draw a parallel that we're going to examine in great depth together. And that is that just as the prism captures the light and reveals everything that is hidden in that light, so is it true that your awareness can be thought of as a kind of a prism, in that all of the impressions that come into that awareness are brought into the consciousness that has the awareness, and suddenly that consciousness is aware of all the colors and characters of itself. So that what, for the most part, for sleeping humanity, there's just an impression, a disturbance, and a reaction. There's never any revelation at all. There's no discovery of the qualities of the soul as they are reflected in a consciousness made aware of itself through what passes into itself, so that it can begin this process of self-realization, of discovering itself actually. That's what we're going to look at in quite depth. I have a story, I have several key questions, key lessons. We have a full gamut of studies today. I hope that you're up to it. So have you ever rounded a corner and seen something, to use words, so immense that when you came to that point, everything in you just came to a kind of a stop? And if that's true, then you know that when you came to a stop, essentially, God willing, you were safe to do so. All you wanted to do was just remain in that particular, in quotes, place, which is actually awareness of this relationship that is taking place because there was a revelation of some kind. Here is this immensity outside of you, this color, this form, this movement. And there is an unquestionable parallel between the experience of what you see and the fact that somehow what you are experiencing in your awareness as a result of that revelation has brought you into a completely different relationship with that moment, and more importantly with yourself, because suddenly you are experiencing something in and of yourself that could never be experienced were it not for that moment where that revelation took place and you realized yourself in that revelation. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's such a good example of it. We've all had moments like that. I can think of maybe 3 or 4, 5 moments in the world. Patricia and I had gone years ago to the Galapagos Islands, and they have these calderas, volcanoes that literally sit in the ocean that have expired, where you can dive into these calderas. So you're moving into an area like the size of this room that's underwater, and it's replete with the fauna, the creatures that live there. And at one point I had wandered off from my diving buddy, which you're not supposed to do. And I turned a corner, and there, just floating in the water, perpendicular, was probably a 1,500-pound sea lion. Eyes were closed, arms were out like this. And I thought, oh God, the creature's dead. Because as I looked at it, in its massive trunk was a huge bite mark. I mean, it's clearly, that wasn't any guppy that did that. Some immense shark had taken a whack at this sea lion, and I thought the creature died from it. So I anchored myself to a stone because there was some current. And I was gobsmacked with the vision of that creature there, and then it opened its eyes. And then I realized, my God, this creature isn't dead. And then this solemn state, this quietude, this incredible, impossible to describe meaning of how alone this creature is. Sitting here where no one knows it's in a caldera amongst these crystal clear waters, waving back and forth and healing quietly by itself. Inseparable from everything that was taking place. And in that split second, I experienced the totality of the loneliness and yet the singularity. Not alone at all and yet totally alone. That kind of moment reveals to individuals that are fortunate enough, A, to come upon them, and by the way, you always do, but you don't know it, because there's a poet could take and write for decades on that one impression. Picture's worth 1,000 words. One impression that no words, no matter how poetic, will ever be able to pursue, let alone possess. And who's the recipient of that moment? In this instance, it was my good fortune. You see a field. I love to see fields when the wind is moving them, like waves, only out of grass. Have you ever been around an immense waterfall? There was a commercial that was surprisingly good. I don't know if you ever saw it. And apparently the boy was mute. He couldn't hear or speak. He was with his father, and his father took him in a Subaru, I guess, out into nature, and they came upon this immense waterfall. And his father signed. He said, "Do you feel that?" And the boy, "Oh yes, I feel that." You've ever been around that, you can feel the immensity of something like that. Or if you've ever been lucky enough to see a full moon on the ocean when it's quiet, or the lights dancing on it, the billions of diamonds as the water reflects them. All of these things bring about certain moments in us that we can call an impression, but where the impression that we're experiencing isn't that which is out there and that which is in here. The impression is a singularity of a relationship that exists between what is being observed and the awareness in which it is being reflected. This is an important thing to understand. We all, if we have any longing in us at all for the divine, what that longing is to have an uninterrupted relationship that isn't connected to the divine, but where your consciousness and what is being revealed in it through your awareness of whatever that condition may be, suddenly you realize, I am not apart from this. You're like the fish in the ocean seeking the water. You are already a part of the very thing that you long for, but failing to recognize it because you're identified with the image of what you long for, and then you try to find a connection so you can experience what you call that connection. Did you know that a real connection with anything is empty of everything? A real connection with anything is empty of everything, because all there is that. This is the true meaning, by the way, at least one version of it, in the idea of Buddhism: perfect emptiness, perfect fullness. So, setting established, yes? Now, let's see, speaking of Buddhism, which isn't separate from turn over a stone, split a piece of wood, there I am. Buddha was teaching, and he said, and we've talked about this, but please don't go to what you think I'm saying. If a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? Now, if you've ever really pondered that, you understand when the question is asked, your mind has to get kind of quiet. Because, let's see, if no one's there, who's there to hear it? And yet on the other side, well, obviously it makes a sound, it fell. So immediately there's a struggle set up in that consciousness trying to resolve what it can't resolve, because the understanding belongs to a world far away and above this nature that thinks to itself a sound is a sound, and therefore it's always there when a tree falls. Because the idea in this mutual dependency is that if there aren't ears, there's no sound. That you have to have ears for there to be a sound. That you have to have eyes to be able to see something. And if there's no ears, there's no sound. If there's no eyes, there's no seeing. This is an important distinction to make, because it proves, if you can understand it, that there is literally no existence of anything without the consciousness that registers it. No awareness of something, nothing to be aware of. Are you following me? I want to keep it simple. Max Planck, which isn't a big board. Never mind. we call my younger brother Max, because he is the Max. German physicist, the 1930s, pretty much considered the father of quantum mechanics, Max Planck. He said, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as a derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything we talk about, everything we are, everything we regard as existing postulates consciousness. Now, I don't know where that falls on your brains, but basically what Planck was saying is that without consciousness, there's nothing there. And everything that is there is a priori a part of the consciousness that registers its existence. Please? I don't want to bring in confusing things to some of you. Your eyes roll back in your head. It's almost incomprehensible. In fact, I use the word, it's almost incomprehensible to grasp that while I am physically dissimilar from you, aren't you glad? I am physically dissimilar from the trees, the grass, the sunlight that feeds them. While I am physically dissimilar from the forms I see, yet in this awareness is by a relationship beyond thought an understanding of the quality and the character of everything that enters into that awareness. And there's proof of this. I hope I go slow. I don't want to leave you behind. If I have to leave you behind, I will, by the way. I can't stop for the sake of those of you who won't work. What I just said is that one way or another, and every beautiful truth that ever came out of life, every physicist that ever made a massive discovery came upon that how? Something caught their awareness. Something was drawing them into something they didn't know why they were being drawn to it, other than something had a longing to conceive and understand whatever their mind had looked at. Their attention, therefore, went into the field of that awareness where that object or idea or principle was being formulated. The ability for them to give their attention to whatever sat in the field of that awareness connected them not just to the object or principle, but to the awareness that holds both at the same time. And out of that relationship came and comes all great discoveries, all tremendous truths that are spoken by men and women who are capable of entering into that field with attention and drawing out of it, listen, not just the principle, but a part of their own soul that is inseparable from what they are aware of. I think I'll let that sink in for a minute. Can you feel that even if you can't understand it? So the more deeply, in quotes, that I give myself to the awareness of any subject in my mind, one day you'll be so, one day you work, you'll be so glad that you will have a living connection to the Father's many mansions. Whatever I give my attention to, the more I discover myself through that relationship. Not the more I discover about it, because it doesn't exist apart from my awareness of it, from my consciousness of it. So the more I give my attention to it, the more my consciousness is brought into the realization of the characters and the qualities of itself that were there even a priori to whatever the condition is that my consciousness was drawn. Still with me, everybody? Now, what if that's true? Meaning, if it's true, what does it mean? In one respect, I am all that I see. Because I can't see anything that isn't reflected in my consciousness. And I said at the outset, I said, I'm not a tree. And yet everything about a tree lives in me. I'm not the blade of grass, I'm not the sun. And yet everything about those qualities and characters, every form of light is a form of light. And awareness is a field of light into which anything and everything comes into and passes, holds within that light those forms of light. I am the vine, you are the branches. We talked about this at depth, didn't we? I said, where does one end and where does one begin? Which means, I don't know if you ever heard Emerson, Job nods to Job. Did you ever hear that quote? He was saying that at a certain point, he began to realize that everywhere God looks at God. What is divine looks at what is divine. Not as separate from itself, but as an expression, and if you want to use the words, an extension of itself in time. Because that's what forms are. Forms are the divine in time, playing out the divine through their relationships, so that through those relationships they can understand and discover that everything they're looking at and seeing is, in one way or another, an aspect of their own soul. If that's true, it brings us to our first key question. Take a nice deep breath. Let's bring the key question up. Key question number 1. Read along. How deep, how free does silent awareness run? As free and as deep as the absence of any transitory sense of self caught in the shallow pool of its own making, trying in vain to fathom or otherwise measure what dwells in the depths of a life beyond imagination. How deep, how free does silent awareness run? As free and as deep as the absence of any transitory sense of I caught up in the shadowy pool of its own making. Can you feel that? Nice deep breath. Time for a transition. So we did discuss over the talks in the Pines, I believe it was, but maybe it wasn't. We discussed, I said, where does the branch begin? And we spoke about this at quite depth. We said, well, actually the vine, though it looks different than the branch, and the branch appears and disappears seemingly from out of the vine, just as the fruit seems to be different than the branch from out of which it grows and it disappears, but when the fruit disappears, its seed becomes the next vine. So we talked about this, an indistinguishable relationship between what are different forms of divine principles, so that the vine feeds the branch, but the branch is made of the same stuff as the vine. The vine is eternal relative to the branch. The branch is eternal relative to its fruit. So you can see that there is a movement, a singularity in something that our mind perceives as being quite separate items, quite separate from everything. Yes or no? We can see they're just different forms of the same life principle, and that they manifest this different principle in different forms. But the forms are nevertheless an expression of one life, one light, quite literally. I don't have time to go into this, but this is what Christ was alluding to when he said, if you had the faith of a mustard seed. He's describing an awareness of something that is inherent in the whole of yourself, that already holds the whole of yourself, that you can't see because it exists in quotes in another time. But awareness transcends time. Or said more accurately, time disappears in the field of awareness, because awareness proves there's no distance or distinction between the things that one is aware of. Is this falling on you properly? And if this is true, which it is, let's bring up key question number 2, please. Please don't discount this. The whole world was made so that you can hear this. Where does our sense of self, inseparable from what it sees as being the cause of its experience, begin, and where does it end? Where does my sense of self, inseparable from what it sees as being the cause of its experience, where does it begin and where does it end? Do you understand? Inseparable from what it sees as the cause of its experience? Is the vine the cause of the branch, or are they a singularity? So I look out and I see everyone and everything as separate from my experience, don't I? But we're looking at this idea that maybe everything that I see isn't separate from my experience of it, but there's something in me that separates me out from the branch and the vine. The one that wants to cultivate or otherwise control the way it looks and grows, who I give and what I don't give, who I love and who I don't love. All of that interconnected with this idea of what is the sense of self? One day you'll have, God willing, you say, what is it in me that can't wait to get angry? You say, I don't live like that. People set me off. What is it in me that will throw itself into a memory that as I drink from it, it gets bitter? What is that? Well, I don't do that. That's a memory, and they're good memories, most of them. So there's an incessant separation that you're not aware of at all, by the way. Because the separation, as it appears, brings in a very distinct sense of self that is identified with what has separated you from that moment by bringing you into the conditions and the associations intimately derived from whatever that consciousness has returned to in order to relive itself. I don't mean to speak these long sentences, but that's how it wants to be said. You have to see the whole of something. If you speak in less than whole terms, you speak with a forked tongue. The problem is this planet is filled with human beings with forked tongues, forked brains. What does our sense of self, where does it begin and where does it end? Nice deep breath. There's no such place. There's no border. All you see is something other than yourself. All you can think about are things that yourself tells you you need to think about so that you can come to a self that you want to be. That's all we know. All I know is to look out and let, as it happens mechanically, something in this unconscious nature seize onto someone or something or some thought. That's all I know. It does that, and the minute it does that, it has done that because it already knows the content of what it has flown to, what it's been drawn to. And as it's drawn to its maker, and its maker is the past, then all of the associations required to derive a sense of self are all congealed in that moment. And life becomes death. Light becomes darkness in that split second, and I bathe in that sense of self being derived from that unconscious movement. And I don't see it. I don't see it. All I see is you. All I see are my own thoughts saying, is this clear? Is this good? That's all one sees because one doesn't own anything, including their own attention. Because if you could see what I'm describing to you, you'd realize, and I'll ask again, where does what we call outside of us and our experience of it inside of us, where does that end? Listen, you're sitting in a room, I'm doing the best I can. You're sitting in a room, you're looking at me, quite colorful today. Beautiful background behind me like a green screen. It's phenomenal. You're looking at me. You're not aware of yourself while you're looking at me. You're just aware of the various sensations that are produced through a series of unconscious associations as you listen. Oh, I like that. Now, truth enough, if you hear something good and you like it, that's a resonation. That's resonating inside of you. But you still don't understand that what you're experiencing isn't what you're hearing. You're experiencing yourself as it's being revealed to you through what you hear, which is the reason for a truth class, I might add. to bring you increasingly into a relationship where the unity of discovery becomes more and more appealing to you, as opposed to the disunity and the special sense of self that you have as you run after and chase everything under the sun in order to do what? Give me a sense of self that's safe and secure in the world. As long as you live outside of the world you see, you will never be safe and secure, because there is no such world that you look at that doesn't exist outside of the past, your conditioned relationship to it, and what you hope to pull out of that relationship that will always be nothing but the continuity of a self that's already divided. That's all that can happen. I asked, where does the world outside of me begin, and where does it end? Is there really a distinction between the world outside of me and my awareness of it? Is there a distinction between me looking at you and my awareness of you? Is there? Look at me. Where do I begin and you end? Where do you end and I begin? If we sit here awake, can you do it? I'm trusting that you're able to do this as I'm sitting here. You can't do it if you're stressed. I'm looking at you. I am aware of you. And in that awareness, there's a certain, in quotes, kind of experience. Because when you look at something that you don't want to see, sometimes you just have the experience of not wanting to see it, don't you? But I'm asking you, if you're looking at me, where does the experience of me begin and where does it end in you? Does it have a beginning and an end? It doesn't, does it? It's a single experience. And the single experience is where? In my awareness. But we don't live like that. Far from it. We live where something in me becomes aware of something outside of me, and usually other than me. And the minute that I become aware of something outside of me and other than me, then this same mind that created the illusion of that division then has to sort out what this moment means. I look at you, I got a problem just looking at you. Do you have a problem just looking at people? Of course you do. I look in the mirror, I have a problem with what I see. So here I am, and I have a problem most of the time. Because it's not just what I see with my eyes. This is part of a blindness. In fact, a question came in, I'll answer after the break. I look at, sometime I want you to see this if you can. When you're talking to people, your eyes will go on them for a split second, but they'll say or manifest something, and when they do, your eyes will still be on them, but you will be looking at a thought that was generated by what they said. So you're still looking like you're looking at them, but you're not looking at them at all. The whole of your attention has gone into some field searching for a way to deal with whatever it is that you thought just happened. And as you get the information from that field outside of the moment, which is nothing but the past, as you get the information, then you enter back into the conversation, you throw that into the conversation, and as you throw it in, they respond, they're doing the same thing you are. So if you could see it, here's two people talking to each other. Just like that. And not one of them knows that they're not there. And that what they are experiencing when they're talking to another person is a character and a quality in their own soul. Not light and dark to be judged, not hateful and loving to be considered good or bad, but simply that which is revealed through the constant interaction of what is passive and what is active as they go through that constant reconciliation that has no end to it. So are you understanding the question? Where does, because I'm looking outside, where does that start? No, Chris, I'm not looking out the door. Where does that start? Where does it end? Well, it's all in this awareness. And there is no line. There is no distinction. None. The end of distinction is the same as perfect emptiness. Perfect emptiness is perfect fullness and perfect unity. We don't know who we are without distinction. In fact, most of us are spending our entire life trying to become distinct. You become distinct. Where's the borderline between what I see and what I am? If when I'm aware of that moment I can see, in fact, with the sea lion, with the field of flowers, with the beautiful light, there's no distinction there at all, is there? For a moment, all distinction is gone. And there's just the revelation, listen, there's just the awareness of something within which characters and qualities appear and disappear, appear and disappear, appear and disappear. And the native soul, the awareness of it remains intact, perfectly changeless, even though it's registering all those changes, which may require a certain choice or action. But the point is that the action doesn't begin with measurement. The action begins when something is seen in its entirety. And when it's seen in its entirety, then it's always a wisdom that acts, because it can't act against itself in any way or shape. Yes, please? All right, take a nice deep breath. Can we go a little deeper? So we've been talking about the sea lion. We've been talking about the sea of green behind me. Talking about this fact. Please do it, because you don't know how quickly you are unable to remain in that kind of awareness. Well, that has no beginning and it has no end. There's no place where it starts and stops. But something in me is always starting and stopping everything. Doesn't it? Because that's what I am. I'm like a start-stop machine. Wouldn't it be nice to have a life that didn't start and stop? And usually, by the way, start to get rid of what stopped and stop what you don't want started. Yes? It's a machine, this vacillation of an unconscious nature. If that's true, then I ask you, whatever that thought, in quotes, may be, whatever the object of that thought, and by the way, do you not suffer over your own thoughts? Where does that thought that I'm suffering over appear? Is the thought that I have separate from the awareness of it? If a tree falls in the wood, does it make a sound? We know that it doesn't. Even though in one world we would say, yeah, it makes, under law it has to. We know that the mutual dependency, the requirement between consciousness and the content that it experiences is a singularity. We know that. So I'm now saying, well, here's this thought. And this thought is filled with suffering. But if this thought is filled with suffering, and in truth there's no difference between my awareness of the thought and the thought I'm aware of, where is it getting it? Who's stuffing my thoughts? Please, can you make the leap? Who's coloring my thoughts? When in truth, there's no color to it other than whatever the character may be dragged up from the past. But if it's true that I'm aware of a thought and the thought is part of my awareness of it, where is it getting this what it needs to make me suffer? Do you not suffer for your thoughts? Okay. Outside seems outside, inside seems inside. But we're looking at a fact that there is no outside without inside. This is why it said the inner determines the outer. There's no outside without inside. Can you get that much? So that awareness holds, in quotes, what seems to be both, but really what seems to be both is vine and branch. Because the awareness, like the vine, is a priori to the branch. But yet the branch isn't separate from the vine, and neither is what you see outside of you separate from the seer. What you see outside of you is a continuation of the true seer that doesn't know it's a seer, because all that consciousness is governed by is something that sees what it wants to see, so I can be seized by some kind of pain and then spend the rest of my life trying to reconcile two worlds that can never be reconciled with the mind that wrecks them. How am I ever going to get all this out? So when the meaning of any moment, if you can see it, does the moment of this kind of awareness have meaning to it, or is meaning ascribed to it and an experience derived from the meaning? Right, isn't it? My experience is derived from the meaning. And yet we can see, when we see something perfectly, that sea lion, it was speaking volumes to me, but there were no words. And the meaning only was connected to the whole of the movement. So there was no suffering for that moment. There was just the whole of that moment as it was being revealed to a soul unaware of its capacity to have that kind of empathy and compassion for anything. And yet there was no me having it. Please? Then what's going on? If this moment, literally, pure awareness is empty of everything other than whatever meaning it is given by a consciousness that starts to register those conditions. It's empty, perfectly empty, perfectly at peace, perfectly compassionate, perfectly quiet. What's going on? How do we get to this place? If you're following me, I'm trying to help you see with me that, well, yeah, I can see that's kind of true. But what the hell happens to me? Why am I suddenly looking at, I'll pick somebody else, John. Why am I looking at John and having a reaction? Do you not have reactions when you look at people? Well, why? If it's not built into the moment itself, albeit there is a subcurrent that when all of this is taken in, this impression, the objects that are taking into the impression in this awareness, each and every one of them are already colored. They're all branches. Where's Barbara? They're all forms, aren't they? And each form has a certain past connected to it, a taste connected to it, an experience connected to it. So every form the mind takes into itself comes with it its own story, which is fine, because you have to know the difference between Chris and Pat. But when the difference between Chris and Pat is the love of one and the hate of the other, then you've got a real problem, don't you? Especially when what? Let's look at this together. Nice deep breath. We're trying to figure out what's this distinction? Where does this border come from? And the reason we want to sort this out is because as you take in these ideas and begin to work at what I'm describing to you, you're always trying to find some way to latch on to something that will validate and prove that you know who you are, and so blah, blah, blah. No, I want to know, when this disturbance comes, and I'm so used to living with. Do you know that most human beings live in a constant, unnecessary, futile state of disturbed mind because their mind never stops disturbing themselves by considering the very object that they object to the moment it comes into their awareness? So I'm going to lay this out. First, as you well know, but not as I want you to, first, we've described how life itself, creation, is an organized disturbance. Be a good sweatshirt with it. I'm an organized disturbance. And that's the good part of me. I'm an organized disturbance. We know that creation is an organized disturbance, don't we? And the reason that creation is an organized disturbance is why? Because nothing comes into creation without something acting on something that resists it. Active meets passive, passive resists naturally. It does so because out of its resistance, not only is the form resisting what's acted on it strengthened, but the form itself changes through the relationship that it has to yield to when the divine will acts on the will of the branch. Something new is formed, fruit. Out of that comes this new nature. Now, so here I am, and would you agree you're pretty endlessly disturbed? I mean, please, let's be honest. I'm not saying, because I know some of you, I wouldn't be disturbed if I weren't working with idiots. And I want to bring you back to this idea that the experience of any given moment cannot be divided up between what we say is out there and what's in here. It's a singularity. So what that moment is doing is revealing in that awareness certain qualities that are part of the soul doesn't know are part of it. Consciousness made aware of itself. You say, I want to be aware. No, you don't want to be aware. You want to, what do they call that when they give you a drug that's a fake? You want a placebo life. So here comes this disturbance. Now, most of us aren't aware when we're first disturbed at all. There's just this summary resistance. We've talked about it. Just a kind of resistance. And out of that resistance comes what? Ordinarily, we could recognize, if we're able to do it, that you can't separate active from passive, that it's a singularity. But here comes this disturbance, and suddenly what happens to I have an urge. I want to know what the source of this disturbance is. I don't know what it is yet. This is happening really quite slow. One day you'll be able to see it in slow motion. Here's the sudden urge. Who did that? What does this mean? What's going to happen to me? Oh no, oh no, oh no. It's still no form. It's just a disturbance. But now the mind that's been disturbed wants to return to its imagined peace. So it starts to try to put together what's happening to it. Please? There's still no I there. There's still no sense of self there. It's just a movement, a machine grinding, trying to figure out, listen to this, as it grinds on itself how to stop the noise and the pain. And as it goes through that, little by little, it begins to do what? It starts to form a very distinct sense of self that is inseparable from what it has decided is disturbing it. Please? Like when I'm first, I don't know if you've seen this, it's a little more difficult when you're around people that constantly, in quotes, disturb you. You have to get over that. You got to get over yourself. But have you ever been driving in your car? You wake up in the morning, you're having your coffee, and all of a sudden there's a vague disturbance. You have no bloody idea why suddenly you feel this anxiety or fear or nervousness, suddenly there. And you need to see that the minute that happens, this brain goes on a search and destroy mission. Just, what's that? I don't know. Oh, no. And then it'll seize on the most recent or most dedicated dark state that you're used to, and then it'll bring that in. It'll bring into something that has nothing to do whatsoever with the disturbance itself. Now it can define the disturbance. And the more it defines disturbance, the more confined you are to live in that world of experience produced by what? By the choice of an unconscious mind that wants to make something out of that disturbance, but all it can make out of that disturbance is something in its own image. That's all it can do because that's all it has to call on. Everybody still following me? So, now this nature does what? It begins to assign negative meaning to the moment. Now your day's set. You can go eat your cupcakes and call people and complain to your relatives and try to figure out how to manipulate these people and get this to be right, get through this situation. You can start rushing. It's a grand thing. I can be all caught up in myself because I know. Do that. I know. I know. And nobody can convince me otherwise. But Guy, it's killing you. No, what's killing me is you. And if you just stop that, use different tones. Bring me cupcakes and those little butter cookies that I love. That's what I want, because if I could have a butter cookie, then the experience of my life would be whole and happy for as long as I'm chewing. It's true, isn't it? So this unconscious nature, is there a difference between out there and my awareness of it in here? They are a singularity. And that singularity has no meaning in and of itself. This is what's so glorious. I'll never get this across. I'll die trying to. As it grows deeper, I will eventually kick off trying to get this communicated. Awareness itself is without experience, and yet it allows for every experience. So in the highest meaning of things, awareness is a non-dual state whose experience is of itself, experiencing itself, and in that total fullness. Oh, to live there, which you're meant to do. You get glimpses of it. And the purpose of this talk is to help you feel and bring up the energies that allow a momentary unity so you can experience a little bit of what's being said. Because when you really hear something true, for a moment, there's no what you hear and you hearing it. There's just this sudden experience of a unity. That's what makes truth so delectable, yes or no? So back to this. So here's this moment. I'm disturbed. It's disturbed. It needs to sort out what's disturbed it. And as it begins to search through the records and files that it has according to similar circumstances, it can begin little by little. It seems like it's building a case, but what you're really building is a conflicted sense of self that is defined by the very thing that it's resisting. This is phenomenal. Imagine that something lives in us that insists on giving any particular moment the name of a disturbance so that I know the meaning of the moment, and then in knowing the meaning of the moment, I can hate the moment I've given the meaning to. It's mind-blowing and should blow your mind. One day the truth will blow your mind. It will. You'll fight tooth and nail. You think you want to be free. You don't want to be free. You don't want to be free. It does not want to be free. Got to keep going. So that most of what we experience moment to moment is what? What is most of the meaning of every moment of our life determined by? Something that as it makes that determination creates an imagined dividing line between the world that you see and the world that experiences it. And the deeper and broader that dividing line, the deeper and broader the conflict you have with what you blame for your experience of it. Let's bring up key lesson number 2, and then I'll tell you a story. This is going to irritate a lot of people. You ready? What is it? Read it out loud.
There's nothing personal about any moment in life unless thinking makes it so.
There was a saying, wasn't there? Nothing is good or bad save thinking making it so. Now I'm showing you the reason behind that idea. There's nothing personal about any moment in life. Nothing. Unless thinking makes it so. So that means that how many of you have sort of a flood of constantly deeply personal moments? I'm not talking about holding the hand of someone you love. I'm not talking about seeing that sea lion or the field of flowers. When I say deeply personal moments, I'm talking about where you engage in a constant degradation of you and yourself, everyone else, as you think about them, and sure that what you are thinking about is the cause of your pain, when the fact that you're thinking about them and resisting your own thoughts is the only suffering there is, because there is no suffering of a personal kind in awareness. But awareness allows for every form of suffering. Still with me? So that most of what we experience moment to moment is what? It's born of an unseen summary judgment that is made by an unconscious nature that does so that it can look in the mirror of its own life, find what matches most what it's familiar with, look at that and go, no! Boom, separation. Death of compassion. End of patience. The destruction of everything that is good and true takes place because there is a level of this consciousness that cannot wait to divide up what it sees from its experience of itself, because if it's just one thing, what am I going to do with this experience of myself? Do you understand? I can't have an experience of this character or quality in the moment because I'm not supposed to. I'm not meant to be that way. So my life is constantly dividing things up so that I can save myself from the very division that I create. Do you see it? Here's an apprentice knight, like what do they call them, a squire, and his good knight, Knight. And there's this demon that's rampaging and destroying everything, consuming the citizens. And the king says, whoever will go slay this demon, to him I will give half of my kingdom. And if my daughter falls in love, they can be married, blah, blah, blah. So off goes one night, every night goes out, there's nothing left. Just the horse comes back. I got to go through this quickly. And what's happening out there in the field of battle is that each one of these knights goes out to meet this monster. But the problem is that the monster that all have been described as the rumors come back, it never looks the same to any of the knights. In fact, what the knight encounters when he goes out to the den, the cavern that leads to the castle where the wizard is, when he goes out, he's encountered, as we know, by what we've always called the kind of an amorphous shape. Some kind of black, shadowy thing comes floating out of the cave. And as it does, it begins to do something that's very difficult to describe, but I hope that you're able to see it. It begins to pick out of the moment, from the night, certain images and ideas and thoughts that are very not just familiar to the night, but that are troublesome to the night. So the amorphous shape begins to look a little bit like some of the things that disturb the night. And as the knight's disturbed by what he sees, he draws his sword and he wants to slay what it is that he's being shown, because he believes that what he sees outside of himself proves that it's not him. He has to get rid of the image that he doesn't want to see. Yes? So here's what happens. As he comes out and he's fighting these knights, the more he fights with the object, this is a pretty extraordinary thing. The object, instead of getting bigger, begins to be a little more form-like, to look more like the knight, but it's getting smaller and smaller. Now the knight thinks he's winning the battle. Do you not think you win the battle when you struggle with yourself most of the time? What he can't see is that right behind him, in full 180-degree fashion, is that what he thinks he's slaying is taking on bigger and bigger shape, and more characters of that knight's consciousness are appearing behind him. So he's slaying it on one side, but behind him it's getting bigger. He can't see it. And at last, when he thinks he's dealt the death blow, the thing floop, jumps on him and the knight's gone. Good night, which is where the expression comes from. Fractured fairy tales. I used to love those. So our good knight, he goes out with his squire. He even tells the squire, look, I don't know what's going to happen. It's not very promising. He goes out there and he starts to engage the same way. And the same thing taking place, slashing with his sword. He's seeing these images, they're getting smaller, but behind him what's happening? It's getting bigger. And at the last moment, before he deals the death blow, which would be, of course, his death blow, the squire sees the knight put his sword down and walk over to this well-defined image of himself. Again, behind him, all the connections, all the associations that validate that particular image. Please. And the knight leans over and says something to that amorphous shape that is beginning to look like him. A few words. Never mind, I'm not going to count them. And when he says that, all of a sudden that tiny, well-defined shape explodes, and behind him sucks into the ground, and it's gone, and whatever that is gone. Out walks the princess, chests of gold, diamonds, whatever it is that you want, it's all there. Well, Squire, that is pretty cool. How did you slay that demon? And the knight says, I realized what was going on. Well, good, tell me. He said, well, I don't know if I can tell you. Well, what did you say? Maybe that'll help. And the knight says, all I said was, I've decided I'm not going to make anything out of you. I'm not going to make anything out of you. Now, why would the knight come to that conclusion? And why did that conclusion destroy the demon, the dark shadow? Why would a knight come to that? We've been talking about it, haven't we? Bring up the third key lesson. This is the one that'll rock your boat. Read it with me. The experience we take from any given moment is what we make of it. The experience we take from any given moment is what we make of it. You have to see something in you is taking that experience out of a field that has no such quality other than the potential of that in the field. You have to see yourself actually take that, the meaning of the moment that has been given to you by something that gives it to you so it can make you mean and all the rest of that. You have to see, my God, why would I take from this moment that which makes me into the monster that I'm trying to destroy? Bring up the special writing. I'm going to go through this quickly. You can download it. It is a summary, and then I'm going to give you a quick exercise. Read along with me, please. It's entitled Wordlessness is Next to Godliness. Lessons are not in books, never in words, no matter how sublime. All things wise, timeless, and true in life are realized through revelation-induced impressions, where transient conditions serve as mirrors to the consciousness that receives and reflects them, not just illuminating and educating the soul to the celestial nature of its native gifts, but at the same time elevating it above the illusion of happenstance and conditional existence. So it is that we are created to live in a silent conversation through revelation, wherein we find that this order of wordlessness is a form of godliness. Catch yourself making something that you don't want to experience, and you'll begin to no longer want to make out of that moment anything other than the simple relationship that it is giving you, where you are being revealed and realized by that moment. And here's what I thought might work for you. It's a simple breathing exercise. On the in-breath, you're going to bring full attention to yourself. Don't try to hold it for now. On an in-breath, this can happen anytime, and it should, by the way, not just when you're suddenly disturbed. On the in-breath, full attention within yourself, what we would call remembering yourself, on the in-breath. On the out-breath, bring the outer world into that awareness within yourself. In-breath, full awareness within myself. On the out-breath, bring the world that I see out there into that awareness, so that now I am one with what I'm observing. The observer is not different than what is being observed. And for all intents and purposes, I am, as best I'm able to do it, having some momentary experience that this constant distinction, and you have to understand how deep this runs. You'll see it. It's unbelievable. I live in a divided world that I don't know I've divided. I don't ever see out and in at the same time. I always see my thoughts about out. And then I take my thoughts about being out as something that will deal with the problem within. And I cannot recognize that as long as I look as outside of myself, as apart from the experience of what I see, I will be at war for the rest of my existence with everything and anything that challenges whatever the I is that's looking in that moment. You got it? Work with this. Let's take a break. We'll come back and have our dialogue.
Well, adjustments here. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to get right to our questions and answers here in just a minute. I want to just give everybody a reminder, some who may not know, that all these free online talks are sponsored by the nonprofit Life of Learning Foundation here in Southern Oregon, where Guy is the director. And we, first of all, thank all of you out there who help us. This is how we fund our whole foundation, through donations. And if you'd like to help us, please know that every donation you make, no matter the size, helps us to reach out and help others around the world. So you can help us if you would like to go to guyfinley.org/donate. And you can do that at any time. There's a page, and there's also other ways that you can help the foundation that don't cost you anything. So we do appreciate that, and all donations in the U.S. are tax deductible. So I wanted to mention that so you could participate in that as well. All right, I think let's get started. Let's bring Guy back on. And Guy, do you have anything to say before we start with the Q&A?
No.
Okay. All right, so if you're on GoToWebinar, now's the time to raise your hand and get in the queue. Just click on your little hand icon, and that'll put you in the queue. If you have a question or something about the talk you'd like to, an impression, talk with Guy about, you can do that now. Raise your little hand. Click your little hand icon, and then go ahead. We have lots of written questions, Guy. So I think we don't have anybody in the queue. Tony just came on. All right, let's go ahead and take Tony, and then we'll go to some written questions. Tony, you're unmuted. There you go.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Guy, I was an Insight Timer yesterday, and I can't tell you how profoundly that meant to me. And I just wanted to chime in and say thank you. And everything you're saying today, it's just meshing with my current experience, where I made some grandiose it wasn't exactly true. It was a little off the actual, words matter, right? And I admitted to it to myself, but I also said it was important to get the attention of the powers that be, and I got it. It was great. So I was kind of like, where do I go here? So I just love this. It's helping me go through what I'm going through right now. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Tony. It's a beautiful thing. Sometimes I think to myself about that old TV series with David Carradine. I think it was Kung Fu. And it always opened with him learning to walk on rice paper without leaving a footprint. And this is one of those things that comes down as a tradition. It's really just the idea of a principle, that how can a person move through a moment of any kind essentially without creating karma? Because that was the intention of that. And what you begin to discover is that there's no, if anything, the revelation of these characters and qualities in your soul through certain impressions that disturb you, they are a kind of karma that is requiring a reconciliation, and that is paid in full when you no longer resist or struggle with that revelation. Then you're in that moment paying for the old footprints, if you will, meaning balancing that which was unbalanced and incomplete. And now you're not leaving a footprint anymore, because you're not walking around full of resistance and negativity and trying to escape the machination of your own mind through something you're going to become or change others to become. It changes everything for you. It's the beginning of innocence. That doesn't mean a lot to most people, that word now. If anything, it's kind of shunned as passé. But there is a kind of divine innocence that you and I are meant to live in, not connected to, but as the living expression of it, the living movement of it. And that's where you know.
Guy, can I?
Oh, I didn't know you were still
Can
there.
I ask you?
Yeah.
the question,
Yeah.
why does it feel so lonely sometimes?
So,
Like the agony in the garden, you know?
lonely. because we're used to keeping company with idiots. Yeah, I always have. How many of you always have? It's like unbelievable. It's an endless family reunion of nerds and stupid. Wherever you are, I got everybody I need to talk to, and I don't even initiate the conversation. When I think to myself, what happened? I think it's me asking. It's not me asking what happened. It's this brain that already knows what happened, so it can take me through that scene where I wind up with a painful sense of self. And one day you won't miss yourself at all.
But what about the story of Jesus and the agony in the garden?
Yes.
Before he gets crucified.
Yes.
I think it's a necessary.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. It's
well, no. This whole thing is not necessary. Of course, it's necessary because it's describing a certain kind of movement. Look, if we've understood anything I've said, when Christ said it's done, he wasn't saying in that moment it was done. He was saying, as the faith of a mustard seed, who I am awaits me, I enter into the divine, the vine that I am already a part of, and lo and behold, I realized there was never a separation. But I have to go through the iteration of realizing that, because otherwise I'm going to cling to my own will and its insistence that things work the way I want them to work. We can't conceive of the end of ourselves. And if we seek the end of ourselves, we're seeking the beginning of a self that believes now it's ended. There's no such thing. But there is entering into this perfect emptiness in which you discover that awareness is all that I am and all that I need. All the experience comes and goes. Hello, goodbye, I like you, I don't like you, this is great, this is terrible. And you're left innocent. So that awareness itself, look, if awareness is the ground of experience, yes or no? Can you make the extrapolation? Can you extrapolate? Then I wonder if maybe awareness isn't experience itself, only without designated qualities. That there is an actual experience of one's life as Job nodding to Job. That's the aim, to use words. You're in a good place, Tony. Stay close. On we go, Doug.
All right, we're going to take, we have several questions. We're going to start with Susanna, who has two questions. Guy, I'm going to give them both to you, and I think Kate will give them to you as well.
Yeah.
Susanna says, Christians like to say the devil tempted me, as if the devil is in competition with God. Such a ridiculous statement. Is the devil resistance? And then she also asked, differentiate the divine and the vine. Yeah.
Please, one question at a time. So first of all, yeah, it's a ridiculous statement. That the devil tempted me. And why is it a ridiculous statement, and how could I know that from myself? We've been talking about it all day. The only temptation there is born out of a fallen mind that continues to figure out ways first to conflict itself with its contradictory demands, and then as it experiences the pain of its own actions, then it is tempted to fix and heal itself through what it considers accordingly. So that the only evil is the attempt on a human being's part to complete and heal himself or herself spiritually. Because the only way you can even begin to try to heal yourself, complete yourself spiritually, is by imagining what that is. That's why it was said, yesterday's talk, thou shalt have no false guides. Thou shalt have no graven images. Why? Because the very appearance of an image doesn't exist apart from the part of myself that's identified with it. The self creates the image it identifies with. The image is made in the image of itself, and then it wonders why its God punishes itself. Susanna, part 2. differentiate the vine and the divine. No, that's the whole point. Susanna, I don't know where you are, but look outside if you can. If I could, I would just stop there and look outside and be on my way. You look outside, you see, I look out at this beautiful tree, I see our grapevines out there. We've covered this before, but we'll do it again. Maybe we can come on something new. What is that grapevine made out of? What has made that grapevine? Well, we can say, well, let's see, there's minerals, there's water, there's heat, and there's soil. It's made of 4 cardinal elements. Let's just put it that way. What made those cardinal elements? What are all elements made of? Have you not heard that you're stardust? So nothing that exists in this world wasn't made by the force, the principle of light. So what we look at when we see a grapevine is that it is a branch to the sun that gave it form and life. And its life flows through. The vine's life enters into the vine in time. The vine in time enters into a branch in shorter time. And the vine branch fruit, shorter time still. It's a river of light. Some invisible, made visible. Each subsequent level of creation is that movement. So the vine and the branch appear different, but they have the same source. That's why if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you would start to understand that there is no differentiation the way our mind makes of it. Our mind makes of it what it does, and that's the other thing. I was thinking here on the way actually down to class today when Pat and I were driving down. Do you want to hear something, a wonderful thing that awaits you? You ready? Take a nice deep breath. You're not going to believe it. You don't have to suffer over your opinion. What do you suffer over? You suffer over your own opinions. Now think how nutso that is. You're talking to somebody, they say, I don't agree with that. Now, maybe you don't agree with it, that's great, but you tell me why you being in disagreement with someone else's opinion is a punishment. And I'll tell you why, because the more pain you feel, the more it proves to you that you're right. When if you could see things properly, the more pain you feel, the greater the border, the further away you are from understanding anything. Oh, to live without the pain of an opinion. Because you can watch an opinion come up, and there's pain. You're pinned to your opinions. Like a butterfly in a glass. I'm pinned to my opinion. And I take the pain of being pinned, something that you said. No, I pinned myself to my identification with the opinion. Then you can have an opinion, you say it or you don't, but you don't suffer for your opinions. That's my answer, Susanna. Don't you cry. Doug.
Okay. Let's do another written question, and then we'll go to Fiona in the queue. And this comes, I think came in last night from YouTube. Sindasani asks, Guy says, and I quote, "You don't see when thinking." I'm a bit confused. What does he mean by that?
I just spent a whole hour and 20 minutes talking about that. Remember I said we're having a conversation? I'm looking at Chris, and then I make a point, and then I feel the tension in her body. Now you don't, but you're aware of there's a disturbance in the atmosphere. There's in the force there's a disturbance, Luke, and you pick it up. Now when you pick it up, your mind, you're still looking at her, but you're now with one part of you're looking this way, and the other part it's run into all of its associations. Now let's see, do I want something from Chris today? Because if I do, I'm going to console her. If I don't want something from Chris today, I'm going to try to figure out what's wrong with her, and then I'm going to try to show her. But maybe that's not the right. This is all going on like this. And finally you come out and you go, okay, what do you want to do? And you're not talking. With God as my witness, you are not the one talking. What's talking is the part of you that looked away to try to figure out the meaning of what she's feeling so that you can get through that moment and come out with whatever it is that you wanted, which is mostly what? Just don't bug me, okay? Don't disturb me any further. You're like a living disturbance. I don't want to be disturbed. Is there a separation between the disturbance that Chris is feeling and my experience of it? Is there? If you understood what I said, or is it a singularity? Understanding that is to understand the Good Samaritan on the road. No distinction between myself and the one that lays there beaten, because I am the man that lays there beaten. I am the one that suffers everything that every other human being on this planet suffers, and I do so willingly, so that the consciousness that is expressed through this individual can begin to become healed within the consciousness of itself, because it's one consciousness. This is the hope of humanity, I might add, as is Christ, that is that which sees all of this and reconciles it. So anyway, that's it, Sindasani. You can't see when you're thinking, because when you're thinking, all you see is your own thoughts and your reaction to them. On we go, Doug, if there's more to go on to.
We have lots to go on to, Guy, but we're going to take Fiona in the queue next.
Hello, Guy.
Fiona.
One of the words that really stands out today is movement. You mentioned that in a way that explains any kind of experience at all, whether it's the one with the seal or the... I mean, I feel like I could just stop there for an hour on that.
Yeah.
You know, I can...
Yeah, that's
that movement.
That's a
and then the movement.
movement too, isn't it? Within you, that whole thing. It's a singularity, and the proof that it is that I'm sitting here. Where do I want to be? In Boise, Idaho. I'm sitting here in Merlin, Oregon, and you're over there in Ireland. Never mind. In Scotland.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wish I could have seen her face for a split second. You're sitting. And yet it's one movement, isn't it? One thing, one awareness, one experience, beyond words. And yet, to communicate, we want to try to share these things. What else, Fiona?
Yeah, so one movement, and even like microbiome is such a thing right now, as if it's like just in your gut. Your microbiome is actually your whole body and goes beyond your whole body, and you share the same microbiome with everyone in the same room, which is why I think people and animals start to look alike, because everyone's sharing. There is no, and there's no beginning and no end. We are this, but of course that's the movement on that scale, and then there's the movement of that irritation, the experience of people and family members. So I think it's, and honesty is the thing to, I think in years gone by, I've seen where I've been very frustrated and with a family member who just continually does really nasty things deliberately. But because of me in years gone by would say, well, it's okay, I can live with this, and there's other things that I can do. It doesn't really impede me. I've already not being honest with myself, because really I'm not actually seeing it for what it is that person is nasty, and that's the end of it. I don't need to start to say, I can work around this, I know how to deal with this person, or anything at all like that. And the deep rage that I feel is the indication.
Time out.
The deep rage is the indication that I'm not getting to that reality.
stop. I asked, is there a place where that starts and my experience through my awareness of it, where it stops? Does it start and stop someplace? And we all can see, at least to some extent, it doesn't start and stop. It is the fullness of time in one respect. The fullness of time, not this time and that time, the fullness of time. Because if we understand there's no distinction, that means there's no distance, no difference. So what has to happen, and this goes to what Tony was asking, and you will struggle with this, you must. What if, instead of trying to come to a conclusion that I could be at peace with, he's just nasty. I still have the taste of nastiness in my mouth, don't I? I'm still quite different from that nasty person. Now, is that person nasty? You betcha they're nasty. All sleeping human beings are nasty. It's a fun word, nasty. And why are they nasty? Because they're in pain. Why are they in pain? Because they think I'm nasty. Now, if I understand that I can't experience the nastiness of another person outside of the awareness in which that quality and character is revealed, and that awareness already contains everything that will ever appear within it, that means that when I experience suddenly this nastiness, instead of letting my mind try to figure out how to deal with you, I don't try to deal with you at all. I try to be as deliberately attentive as I can, so that in the awareness the nastiness appears and it disappears. And listen to this, and I'm left with the emptiness of not hating someone. I'm left with the emptiness of not punishing myself or wanting to drag your feet into the fire because of what you've done. And then it turns out, if you get to that point, that really what you're empty of in that moment isn't the fullness of the moment. What you're empty of is that self that fills it as it does with the meaning it needs, so you can go on being a mean person like the one you blame for your pain. You just have to see it, don't you? There's no getting around this. I have to see. Seeing doesn't mean looking out from eyes that separates itself from what it sees. Seeing is being aware of everything that I see. The experience of that awareness is the sum of myself in that moment. But the sum of all of these moments is greater than the individual experiences because they belong to an awareness, to a divine light that already holds everything within it. That's the best I can do, Fiona. On we go, Doug.
All right, we have 5 questions. We're a little after the hour. We'll just start knocking away, and then you let me know
Very well.
anybody in the room wants to come up. I think now's a good time as well. So here's Shannon, Guy. When you're faced with a fear that is causing you panic that you feel like you can't control, how do you let go of the unknown? The fear is, she's saying for herself, is due to an upcoming surgery that isn't something you ever expected you'd have to go through, and something you don't want to, but have to. You need to. Thank you for all you do.
I myself just went through that. Literally. And the key here, Shannon, is to understand. Everybody understand what I'm looking at what's coming. And I don't like it. My mortality may be at stake. I don't know what the condition is, but make it the worst possible. Is it the unknown that I'm afraid of, Shannon? Am I afraid of the unknown? Please, write this down, Shannon, and contemplate it. There is no psychological fear without negative imagination. There is no psychological fear without negative imagination. So the meaning of the moment when I consider what's coming is being filled in and colored by a consciousness that can't wait to figure out the worst possible scenario, so then it can sit and hate and fear what it's imagined. And so it feeds that unconscious nature. It expands the border between what is and what I am experiencing, instead of bringing an end to it by recognizing, you know what? I have another. The feel is real, but the why is a lie, Shannon. Hell yes, I'm afraid. I can feel it. But I'll be darned if I'm going to go ahead and give myself over to the continuing imagination of what this means. Rather, I'm going to become the student of this experience rather than one who's used by an experience made by a consciousness that can only create fear for itself. You must see it. Everything that you want rests within you already. You are what you're waiting for. The freedom that you long for already exists. Innocence is already there. On we go, Doug.
All right, let's go to Carl next. He asked, should there be a balance between going out, living life, wherever drawn to, or should we consciously try to remain present 24/7 to obviously not lose ourselves? As I'm starting to notice, the effort to remain present is an attachment of judging ourselves when we fail to remain present. So where is the balance in all of this, Guy? I'm stuck in this paradox the last few months.
Yeah, you have to be there. You've got to be stuck there. See, there's no paradox. What you call paradox is levels. And you're trying to resolve levels with the mind. The paradox of the seeming difference, the distinction between the two, is because you believe, A, if you could, you would, and you can't do what you've described. And the clearer that you see you can't do what you've said you should, the more you'll free yourself from the idea of someone who one day will be free when they finally get everything in place. You don't enter into a new understanding without dying to an old one. It's impossible. And the only way that you die to an old understanding is when you see how futile it is to cling to the actions that old understanding tells you you have to take to be secure. So here's a man, you can see it, he's not alone. I feel this longing. I can feel this. I've been like this maybe for a long time. Maybe it just was awakened by a shock. But I know it's some way that there is another order of being, and I would like to get into it. But you can't. You know the old saying, you can't change a leopard's spots? What does it mean? It means that nature is that nature. So if you can't change the leopard's spots, then the animal has to die. But if the animal dies, then something else is born. And only as something is dying is something born. That's the rule. So you will, Carl, as you begin to see the futility of what you call trying to, and I'm not pleased with God as my witness. You don't know it. How do I say this? Your idea of a balanced life isn't your idea. But hold the fort. What's the expression? But hold the horse. Hold something. That's all I know. All I know is what I think is a balanced life. But Carl can see, as I hope you can, that over time, as you study, you begin to realize that how can an imbalanced nature ever know what a balanced life is? And there's no arguing that I'm unbalanced. Anybody want to argue how unbalanced they are? We think anger proves balance. Loneliness, irritation, impatience. Because I wouldn't be this way if I wasn't trying to balance you and everything else. No. The more you see this unbalanced nature trying to balance itself, the more you withdraw from its will. The more you withdraw from its will, the stronger it will try to impress its will upon you. And now you will begin to become aware of a will that you always thought was your own, but was never your own. And then the wheat begins to separate from the chaff. And the more you persist with that, the purer the perception, the less choice there is to make between which one of these worlds do I want to live in. The choice is made for you in that awareness. On we go, Doug.
All right, Guy, we're going to go to Masami next. And he asks, she, could you please explain that breath work a bit more? I'm not sure what you mean by exhaling as you bring that awareness of the outer world inside you.
Sure, Masami. I said first, and you can do this at home. You can do it anywhere. I was talking to the men yesterday on the golf course. You can do it everywhere you are, anytime that you can remember, especially if you catch yourself in some kind of irritated, conflicted state, which is synonymous with golf, in case anybody doesn't know that. These are the jokes, Roger. No stone awakens. So I said on the in-breath, I'm going to bring all that I can within myself of my awareness. I'm going to gather the sensation of my body, I'm going to gather everything that is impressing itself, gather everything, Masami. Bring it into what we call remembering ourselves, as fully present to myself as I can. But that's only half the equation. Once I've brought all of that in, on this in-breath, on the out-breath, I'm going to go ahead and expand that awareness to the world around me. So now I'm not just aware of everything within me, I'm aware that everything outside of me is within this awareness as well. That's bringing about a unity bringing a mind into a unified state so that it can begin to see with clarity, I might add. And when I say see, experience. Remember I talked about that sea lion? Suddenly, this is a magical moment because there is no longer a distinction between the observer and the observed. That sea lion was not by itself. I was a part of that life and its death. And of course, now the creature can't have the same experience, but you can begin to have that experience with everything this mind creates, every thought, every judgment it passes about outside of you. Just try to remember, I am both of these worlds at the same time, but you can't remember in thought. You start there. You start with a remembrance. Then you become the instrument of what you're remembering. I hope that helps, Masami. One more, Doug, and then we'll save the other remaining two for Wednesday.
All right, let's go to Annette, and we'll end with Annette, and then we'll open it up to the room after that. She asks, are we addicted to our reactions and solutions until we wake up, step back, and then what? Attempt or try to have a fresh, unbiased view? Is that possible? Then discretion is gone and we accept everything?
Annette, it's a perfect question to end this portion of the presentation. First, you have to see that at every possible opportunity, your mind will find something to judge you for. You're not aware of that. You experience the judgment, the meaning of the judgment, and what you have to do to escape the judgment that you've cast upon yourself. So no, Annette, we are not addicted to anything. There is a level of consciousness, something that you think is you, me, we, that cannot live without what sustains it. What sustains that false self, Annette, is the endless consideration of the division that it creates between what it sees and what it experiences. So that in the division between what I see, it is then addicted to trying to find a solution to the suffering that it created. And she says, until we wake up, step back, and then what? So this is kind of an OMG moment for Annette, because she's beginning to suspect this could be true. But what's my life going to be like without this constant distinction that I make between experience of myself and what I blame on it? And that you have to find out. But I can tell you it's a hell of a lot better than living in the darkness of an endless distinction that drives me and everyone else around me nuts. You suffer for distinction. Distinction is inseparable from identification. Identification is inseparable from resistance. You see all that, and you'll begin to allow this thing to go on, and you'll realize that everything in you that wants to try to figure out what's going on is itself feeling in jeopardy to what it's decided it means. You'll see it, and then you won't struggle with it. And can one live without discretion? Of course one can't live without discretion. The point is, A, to see that you have, the point is, A, to see, now that doesn't mean letter A to see. The point is to see clearly that as you are, you have no discretion now. That you suffer from your discretion because it's not your discretion. And the clearer that becomes to me, the more I'll allow these moments to come, and I'll feel this sense of self trying to discreetly figure out what's going on, and I'll let it be there, and I'll act accordingly if it's wise. But if I taste the ignorance, the pain, and the identification in it, I'm going to let that so-called discretion go on by, and then I will be in a new place, in a new relationship with another order of what you want to call divine awareness that knows what to do and what not to do without taking thought. So, we're done with that. Does anybody want to come up and speak? Come on, Katie. Here comes Katie. Yay, Katie. Here comes Katie. Yep. Show us the victory run, Kate.
I don't think I can do that.
Okay.
Annette just said, and then we won't need a monthly massage, haha, in response to what
You might have one, but you won't need them. You're trying to rub out wrinkles that you create.
That one hit home. Okay. Hi,
The
everyone.
world will sell it to you. Boy, will.
Right.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate. In the talk, Guy said, a real connection with anything is empty of everything because all there is that. So yesterday, my younger sister sent me a text, or texted me, and there was a question in it. But the question, it was a loaded question. I mean, there was so much behind this question. I knew that there was like, all this stuff must be going on at her end in order for her to be asking me this.
You're saying there was a history to the question.
Not like that.
Okay.
It was more like, I could instantly tell, like, she would only be asking this question if something had fallen apart in her life.
History. That's what I mean by
Okay.
history. Yeah.
Not between us, but.
No.
yeah,
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, exactly. So, a real connection with anything is empty of everything. Well, it sure wasn't empty of Kate in that moment, because I spent probably 10 minutes trying to formulate a response that would somehow, I wanted to be the big sister who she could, have the shoulder to cry on or whatever it was, having no idea what was actually going on. Still don't, because she didn't reply the way that I hoped she would, which was to tell me everything, And it was just kind of funny to see how much there was a taker there. There was no
Yes.
giver. There was nothing open to making a real connection.
Yes.
It was really just trying to create a connection that would give me, Kate, this big sense of self. I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit, but not really, because you have these small moments where, like, this whole vista opens up in front of you interiorly, where you see what's really going on inside of you. So it was just a really eye-opening moment, and I appreciated that.
Wordlessness is next to godliness. Wordlessness is next to godliness. Now, there's times where you have to respond. Somebody calls and says, I'm at the emergency room, and I need my aspirin. You can't then try to you think about what's a good answer. You have to go do it. But so many times, as Kate was describing, for a moment she could see there was this field, all this history, all this movement. What if I understood that and I didn't have to respond right away? And I could leave the sea lion of my sister floating there in the caldera just until something was clear enough to me. Instead of me trying to find the thing that would make the sea lion come alive. Oh, and by the way, the sea lion at the end, when it opened its eyes after a few minutes, I kind of swam up closer to it, and all of a sudden it swam right by me. Massive thing, off to live its life. It was a happy ending.
Hello, my name is Eric. And my favorite sports to watch are college football and college basketball. And they have what are called rules committees. There's an inner parallel here. They have rules committees where at the end of each year, they sit down and come up with a bunch of rules to change the game for the better. They're trying to, in other words, it is their job to sit down and come up with new rules. And what they're trying to do is make it so the games, college basketball, college football, nothing ever goes wrong again in the game. And in doing that, absolutely everything is going wrong. And the old saying of fix it, or if it ain't broke, fix it until it is. That is exactly what is happening.
Yes.
To the point where I'm going to have to turn to high school sports for more innocence, but they're going to end up paying high school athletes too at some point.
Sure of it.
Oh yeah.
That's a great
The whole
parallel.
The whole point is the rules committee in here, and when I say something, there's a rule about perfect how you're supposed to respond and how you're supposed to look at me, and so that there's never any disturbance in me whatsoever, and yet that creates the disturbance.
Correct. Look, he just described perfectly how this world is made in the image of an unconscious nature that believes it can save itself so that it never has any pain or problem again. And the more it saves itself, the more in dire straits it is, creating the very thing it's trying to escape. That's the great wheel of reincarnation of this darkness. And your capacity to bring that into the light of how that's all working is your extrication from it. And yes, the loneliness of not being a part of this world is a mandated experience that leads you into being part of another world in which you're never alone because you're never alone. Nobody else is up, and so with that, I will see you all on Wednesday.